Hey everyone, I'm back in my messy office. It's messy because I'm always working while I'm in here, and so it's probably been messy like this for the last 7 years while I've been working on the documentary. I keep thinking I'll get an opportunity to clean up or at least tidy up, but thus far I have not. So let's see, what have I been doing? I'm in the marketing phase of the documentary. I'm trying to get this thing. I'm creating press releases and doing artwork and uh, and doing stuff to help promote the documentary. I went and picked up the original artwork for the poster from Neil Portnoy. In fact, ta-da! There it is. That's the original. And as soon as I got my hands on that, I came back and I used it to compose the final poster. The poster may go through design changes. You know, I may change all the graphic elements around it, but basically, it's a generic movie poster, what they call a one sheet. Anyway, if you look further down here on the page, you'll see a post I did about the poster, and you can see it there. Otherwise, there it is. Starting to feel like a real movie now. Anyway, so what is this video about? Obviously, it's about CGI, computer generated images, and you might be thinking, what? There's CGI in a documentary in Laughing All the Way? Of course, yes, there is, and I want to tell you about it now in the interest of full disclosure. There are a few things in there that aren't real, but mostly it's just illustrations. So, yeah, you saw an example of CGI. You all know what it is. If you've seen a movie in the last 3 decades, you've seen some type of CGI. And we most commonly associate it with special effects in movies and television. But it really is a broad term that includes the way they do digital map paintings now, and any graphical image, in a movie or TV show is considered CGI. When I first started doing CGI back in the early 90s, there was no term for it. We just called it computer animation. But then Jurassic Park came along, and then the industry began to rapidly change and embrace this new technology. And I guess they figured they needed a term for it, so CGI it is. But the way I still think of it just as computer animation. And most of what I like doing is 3D. And what I enjoy the most is visual effects that you're not meant to know are visual effects. And believe me, you've seen a lot of movies that aren't special effects movies, quote unquote special effects movies like Star Wars and all that. You've seen a lot of movies where you're seeing visual effects and you don't know you're seeing visual effects. And that's the idea. They're a tool for a filmmaker to tell a story and solve problems. And the first time I saw something, and believe me, I've followed special effects for years and years. I used to get, before they went under, all the Cinefex magazines. Cinefex is kind of like an industry magazine for the film industry, the visual effects side of things in the film industry. Here's the one for True Lies, and here's one for Avatar. And I'll tell you, this magazine, oh look, here's one for Inception. And Inception is an effects film, but you're not supposed to feel like you're seeing visual effects. And they go into great detail about how they do the visual effects, and explanations of how it's actually done. And a lot of this is for real on-set visual effects or other visual effects, things that are done in camera, and that's fascinating to me. I love that. But the magazine eventually went under, and I really think it's because visual effects became a thing where you just go, "Oh, yeah, I know how they did it. Lots of big computers and lots of people sitting in rooms and making it all happen." And that's essentially true. In fact, I quit buying the magazine because every issue was like, yeah, so we, to create this sequence, we used Industrial Light and Magic or whatever, and we used these computers and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know. And it stopped being of interest to me because, I'd look at it and go, yeah, I can do that. I do that. A lot of people do that. Go online and grab yourself a free copy of Blender, 3D software that is capable of producing cinema quality visual effects. You can do things for free now on your home PC that it used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a special effects company to do. And so I just lost interest in the magazine, and yeah, they went under. Anyway, so on to the whole point of this. You first, the opening titles tell you right there, this is about CGI, and there's an example of CGI. And most CGI in the documentary is illustration. It's, I've got photos, lots of photos, and for the most part, I present them kind of straightforward. But I like working in 3D, so when a photo comes up, it's in perspective. There may be light reflections on it and such. I like them to kind of look real, or maybe they're laying on a tabletop or something like that. And I know that there's this kind of fad of doing what they call a parallax shift. So you have an image with, say, a person standing in front of a background, and to make it look like the camera's moving, they shift around, they shift those elements, so it's like the foreground element is revealing something in the background. Call it a parallax shift, and that gives it some depth and reality. I think Ken Burns is an amazing documentary filmmaker, and I think he might have pioneered that effect for his Civil War documentary. It's an incredibly cool effect. I did some of that. It's very subtle. I tried to not overdo it. I didn't do it on all photos, but I did it on a few. Making choices about where you'll use that is just depends on where you're at in the story and what surrounds those images, and whether you feel like you needed to have movement different from just seeing a photo. In other words, are you presenting it as a photo, or are you presenting it as being there? So I did some of it. But most of the other stuff is like documents, tons of documents, in the final segment especially, where, and I've seen it done where they just cut to the shot of the document, and they'll highlight a word or a sentence that's important, and pull it out to draw your attention to it. And I've done that in the past, but I don't like doing that. I'd rather make it look like I had the camera there and I shot the document. And the advantage of doing it in CGI is I can start out on a wide shot of that document and then suddenly just bring the camera in right onto an individual word, or even an individual letter if I want to. So how I can draw your attention to the relevant things in that document is completely different when I have an infinitely small camera with infinite focus that I can put anywhere I need it. And I just think it's a more interesting way of doing documents and stuff. So the other way is that I've used it is showing computer monitors. There's a lot of things that get referenced that you don't have any footage for. And I don't like creating wallpaper video, but just for the sake of putting it up there. But you need to keep the images moving. And sometimes people will say things in their interviews, and you go, well, I want to use that soundbite. I want to use that portion of the interview, but what am I going to cover it with? The last thing you want to do is just hold on their face. Talking heads, I've seen documentaries like that. It just cuts from one talking head to the next, and there's no video. It's just people talking. And that can be okay sometimes. So you want to establish who it is talking. You want to see them on camera, but once they start referencing something, you want to go to that thing. You want to tie in a visual to what they're talking about, and you're more likely to stay focused and paying attention if you can see what they're talking about. And at times, the only thing I had was to generate images of what anybody could have access to, which is websites, and to tell the stories. And I just tried to do it in an interesting way. Now we start going towards closer to more realistic. The 2002 program, the booklet that would be handed out to all the attendees at the festival. I quickly realized that I was going to have to refer to it. The people would say something in their interview or whatever, and I would need a shot of the program to help illustrate what's being talked about. In fact, one of those was myself in my interview where I'm talking about the program, and so I need to see it. Well, I could get the program. I have it right over here. I could get it and set up my camera and light it and, flip through the pages and shoot all the stuff. And that would be incredibly time consuming, and it would never be just exactly what I'm looking for. And I just said, you know what? I could build a CGI model of the program fairly quickly, and then lay it on a CGI table and light it, and do as many shots as I want of anything on any page. And so I did. That's exactly what I did, and I'm so glad I did, because it opened up my creativity. It allowed me to think in terms that I wouldn't have thought of had I just shot it with my camera. There's a shot of where the Coke logo on the sponsors page peels off the page and flies out of frame. I wouldn't have thought of that had I been restricted to just a video shot. But here I just said I can do anything I want. I could rearrange the words on the page and magic could happen. And so I didn't go overboard. I didn't get ridiculous. I limited it to things that helped illustrate the point I was trying to make. So there's another way that I used computer animation, and that is Google Earth. And originally, so there was two moments. One was in the Sarah and Rodney segment, the second segment of the documentary, and Lauren starts talking about how we had to stop in this small town in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, and make this the conference call with Rodney Dangerfield, because we weren't going to make it to Phoenix in time. So to illustrate that we were just in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, with all due respect to people who live in Camp Verde, Arizona, it was a very small town. And we were fortunate to find a place that we could do the conference call. But I wanted to illustrate how remote of a place it was by showing an aerial shot coming in over the highway and then flying into the place we were at in this small town. There's no way I was going to be able to do that. I couldn't, get a drone and go down there and do it. I just, so I was trying to figure out a way how I could use Google Earth or some other way to illustrate where this town is there in Arizona. And I swear, it's just sometimes things happen that make you believe in magic. I got a notification from Google that I had been selected to try this new thing called Google Earth Studio. Now, this is creepy because are they monitoring me? Have they heard me talking about this? Have they, and they have this thing called Google Earth Studio, which takes all the best features of Google Earth, but it puts it into an interface. It's a web app. It's based at their site. It puts it into an interface very much like After Effects or other animation software, and it allows you to go anywhere on the Earth and generate aerial views, all the right down to ground level, from as high as you want, outer space, all the right down to the, so you can pick the location, and you pick the year and time of day and all of that, the month, and do you want cloud cover? It has a lot of options, and it allows you to keyframe your camera very much like other animation software. So you can fly into things, fly around things. And the advantage is that it's all running on their servers, so it's very, very fast, and you don't have the problems you would normally have using Google Earth on your own computer, where you know it needs time to update all the details of the image from frame to frame. And I said, well, this solves the problem. And I generated a CGI shot of coming into Camp Verde, and I used the same technique later when I needed to do a similar shot for New York, because we're talking about where we were in New York, in Midtown Manhattan. And I really wanted to show the viewer, this is where we were. We were right there, next to Central Park and across the street from Carnegie Hall, and illustrate with this shot coming up out of Central Park and over and straight down on top of the building where we were holding the auditions. It's a very dynamic shot, and it looked great. Of course, the requirement is you have to keep, the Google Earth logo on the image. You can't remove that, and I don't have a problem with that. Give credit where credit is due. It's just, it's an amazing tool. Being able to do something that's convincing. I mean, going back several years ago, a good filmmaker friend of mine, Pat Kirby, wanted to do a Star Wars fan film. And it was done as a full-blown, we had a large crew on location, and it was all shot on film, and I was a part of it on location. And he asked me if I could do visual CGI enhancements to a few shots, set extensions and stuff like that. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. I have the skill to do that. But the particular one shot in particular was it had live pyro. It's a nighttime shot, and you're exposed for the lighting on the set, and then this explosion goes off, and it's extremely bright, and just whites out. There's all kinds of smoke in the air, and it just totally whites out the frame. And as I was trying to track the shot to get the data I would need to add the CGI elements. As soon as it would get to that fully white frame, I would lose all the tracking data, and I couldn't track the shot to be able to lay in my elements. My elements were moving relative to the image, and it got to be impossible. And I just said, you know what, I can totally just create the entire shot in CG a lot quicker than I could track this shot and get it right. So I just rebuilt the entire set and everything, and recreated the shot in CGI.
Probably the biggest one was the opening shot of the live action, where Skip Burrows and company really did a great job giving us some big explosions. But due to tracking problems, we couldn't track the CG backgrounds with all the smoke and camera motion. So luckily we had Chuck Bayerano, who just replaced the whole shot with totally CG, and it intercut really well.
And it's not perfect. I was working with the technology back then was very limited, and add to that Pat decided he wanted to enter the film in a Star Wars fan film competition thing, and the deadline was coming up, and I needed to get this stuff done fast. And it wasn't the only CGI I was doing for the film. One team was working on lightsabers and blaster hits and all of that, and I was doing all the ships and the cities and all of that kind of stuff. And suddenly I thought, initially I thought, okay, I have as much time as I need. And mind you, I'm also out working on other television shows and movies. I've got work, and I'd come home and then work on the Star Wars thing. And so suddenly I just like, okay, bang, 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 just get this thing done. And so it is what it is. It's not perfect. But I remember how much I enjoyed that, because it's like you're trying to create something with which you can fool the audience. In Laughing All the Way, in the first segment, first few minutes of the documentary, Mark Allen is talking and telling a story about his mother coming to see one of his shows there on the Las Vegas Strip. And it's a very funny story, but he references his mom, and I want you to see his mom in your head when he talks about his mom. And I got a photo of his mom from him, and I said, do I just want to cut to that photo and see his... No, I don't want to do that. I'd rather make it look like it's in a nice frame on a table in Mark's house with other photos. There's a picture of Mark in the background, and there's some stuff in the foreground, and he's talking about her being in the back of the club, of this comedy club, sitting in the dark, kind of in the shadows back there. And so I kind of wanted to provide a similar feel as he's talking about that, which is we come around other things and then up into her photo and try to render it more realistic. And I think that I pretty much accomplished that. I do have a friend who knows CGI stuff, and actually it's my son-in-law, my oldest daughter's husband, and he said, well, to me it was obviously CGI, but others have said I had no clue. So I feel like I was successful with that one. I did a similar thing in the Seattle segment with the Brad Upton segment, and he's talking about his dad. And I took a picture of his dad and him when he was a toddler and put it in a frame and generated a shot of that photo in a very similar fashion, with the camera kind of moving around and up to the photo. I also think that one was mostly convincing. In the first segment again, going back to the first segment, the LA segment, I have an interview with Ken Cragen. Ken Cragen, the name Ken Cragen may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but he is a very famous talent manager and a producer. In fact, he was the one responsible for USA for Africa and the We Are the World song that included all the greatest names in music at that time. So most of you are probably familiar with that. We Are the World, Michael Jackson and the others. And he produced that and brought together Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson and all those people. So you might say that's his claim to fame, but actually he's famous for a lot of stuff. And he was Suzanne Huang's manager as well. And so that's why I wanted to interview him about Suzanne. But I also want you to know something about who he is. So before we see him in his interview, I cut to a shot of, because the original picture, the set photo of him and the other producers and all the singers on stage with the USA for Africa banner behind them, and it's one of the photos taken at the same time as the one that's on the cover of the album. And there it is in his office, and I'm just staring at it like, wow, I'm looking at the original photo. And I wanted to have a shot of that so you know who he is before we see him. And so I did a CGI shot. I recreated it, the same frame that it's in, on the wall, with the lighting and the picture in the frame, and the camera comes in to that shot right into a close-up of him before I dissolve over, in the close-up of him in the photo before I dissolve across to him sitting at his desk and we hear from him. And I think that was mostly successful as well. But if it's not, again, you treat it, it's an illustration, right? And let's see what else. Okay, there's the corporate book. Mark Allen refers to the corporate book. It's the book that the company records are put in and kept safe so that stockholders can review it and whatnot. So Jim Shaw, my executive producer in New York, sent the corporate book out to me to go through it in case there was something of value that I could use in my research for the documentary. And Mark references it at some point, but that's not where I use it. I use it in the first segment where he's talking about setting up the company and going by the book and doing it officially, doing everything right. And I wanted to see a shot of the corporate book, the company records. And so I took my little camera, in fact, this camera, and it shoots a beautiful 1080p HD picture. And there are shots from that camera in the documentary. Anyway, I took it downstairs onto a table, and I took the corporate book and laid it there, and I lit it, and I put the camera on a piece of paper, and I slid the paper along the spine and did the shot of the book. And that's what lived in the documentary for until just recently. But I was never fully happy with it. I wanted something more stylized, something cleaner, better contrast, and I wanted to have more control over that shot. When I was looking at the finished documentary, and I said, what can I improve? Now that I can just play, what do I want to go back there and fix? And pull a George Lucas and replace some stuff that I would like to have done better, and that was one of those things. So I just said, you know what, I can model that in 3D and shoot it and get it exactly the way I want. So I did. I went into my 3D software and I modeled it and I took it into layout and lit it, and now there I am doing the shot exactly the way I want to see it, and hopefully that's another one that goes by where people don't realize that it's CGI. But if people do notice, I don't care. It's there are only a couple times where I really want people to believe that this was a real shot, and there were two of them, two moments, and that was in the San Francisco segment. We're hearing it opens with you're hearing KGO radio. We're driving into the city, and it's like you're hearing KGO radio on the radio in the van, and it's part of the prologue into this segment. And then it gets to the title, ninth, 10th, or whatever audition city, 10th audition city, San Francisco.
San Francisco. Here we are in San
And
Francisco.
the audio changes a little bit, and you hear the radio announcer, and she says,
KGO Radio News Time 4:45. This is the KGO
it's kind of teasing into this live interview that they were getting ready to do with Mark Allen. And I was in the room with Mark Allen, sitting there and shooting him on the bed with the phone to his ear and getting ready to do the live interview. But I failed to get a shot back then in 2002 of the clock radio that was in the room. Most hotel rooms have a clock radio, alarm clock radio. And it's probably how we recorded the live radio interview too. Marcus probably, put a lavalier microphone near the speaker on the radio and recorded it that way. But I never got a shot of it. And so I just, could I do it without seeing a clock radio? Well, of course I could, but that's not how you do this kind of thing. You want to have visual reinforcements of the thing that you're hearing. And if somebody says it's 4:45, it's nice to cut to a clock. It's visual continuity, and it keeps you locked into the story. And so I wanted to fade up out of that title, 10th Audition City, San Francisco, while you're hearing the announcer, and then open up on a shot of the clock before we see Mark laying on the bed getting ready to do the interview. So I jumped online and to Google Images, and I researched to try to find what clocks would have been available back then in 2002 or earlier, and what might a hotel room have, in their room. And I saw one that was made by Sony. I don't remember what the model number is, and it's a digital clock, so the numbers are big and bold. And I said I can model that, so I did. I went into my 3D software and I created the clock. A variation of the clock, actually, and a nightstand and some stuff to lay around the table around the clock. And I rendered that out in 4:3 standard definition to match the DV footage that I was shooting on the camera, and made it look handheld, a little bit of movement, and I rendered that out, and it is in the documentary, and everybody has told me that they had no clue that, it wasn't a shot that I shot at that time. So ethically, you could say, well, okay, was that the kind of clock they had in the room? Well, no, probably not. I couldn't get that lucky. Was that book laying on the table when you were there? No, I didn't even have that book with me. It is my book, but I didn't take it on the road with me. There's a big gulp in the background. I think there's a Sharpie pen. Yeah. But it is representative of what could have been, in that moment. So I don't think that just because it isn't exactly representative of what was in the room, that there are any ethical questions to be concerned with. It looked convincing. And so there's another time later in the final segment where a story is being told about Brian Mullen is telling a story about Steve Cato going down to the Las Vegas Comedy Festival offices late at night, and he was getting a radio show going. So he'd go in there and record, and Brian would go down and to see him at the office during those times, and he's talking about how Jay Moore would call, and it'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning, and he's just always talking to Jay Moore on the phone, any time of day. And so I did have visuals that I could help build that sequence to take us back in time. So I created a sequence with footage that kind of look like it might be shot on home video camera back then. But when he says, it'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning, I wanted to see a clock on the wall. And I remember in the back room there where they would do that kind of stuff, there was a round analog clock, cheap analog clock on the wall above the door. And I said, I could model that. And so I did, and I found some images online that I could use as a reference, and I built the clock, and the second hand is ticking. It's like 1:10 and 1:12, a.m., and I shot it with the virtual camera to look like a handheld shot to match other footage, and snuck it in there. And again, everybody says, "Oh, I had no idea. I just thought it was footage that you shot back in, 2002." That's the kind of stuff I love doing. I want those things to go by unnoticed. Isn't that kind of sad? As special effects artists work, their success depends upon you not noticing their work. And I don't have any problem with that, especially if I get to reveal later that, guess what? Surprise, that wasn't real. And so that really kind of, there's a lot of other stuff in there that I'm not going to take the time to go over right now, because what am I, like at 30 minutes on this video? I do want to point out one other thing. It's not a visual sound effect. It's an audio sound effect. And there are lots of sound effects throughout the documentary. You can't get around that. It's, so there are some times where you're hearing stuff that was not recorded in that moment, and I had to build it later in the building of my soundtrack. And it's extremely important to do this because audio is at least 60 or 70% of the product. If your audio doesn't carry you through the whole production, then you just lose your audience. You're actually having an audio experience when you watch a movie or a TV show. You can forgive bad visuals, but the audio needs to be, and so you're reacting to the audio. And so I was always looking for ways to enhance the soundtrack and add sound effects. But the most important one to me was the very end. I got lucky in that there was a shot, Pat Kirby, the jib operator, at the end of one of the final show in the Wayne Newton Theater at the Stardust. And everybody's left the theater. And he takes his jib camera and rises it up into the air and pulls away from the stage and just parks it up there to get it out of the way. And walks away until he can come back later to break down his camera. And for whatever reason, the tape operator in the control room just kept rolling on his camera. He was the closing shot. And so I have this like 15-minute long shot of just the stage. And the workers come out, the curtains open up, and the workers are coming out to clean up. A guy comes out with a bucket and he's got a broom, and right. I thought, well, that's the shot I'm going to use for the closing credits. It's perfect. And but unfortunately, there were no microphones open in the theater. All the microphones, appropriately so, had been faded down, and so there was no sound. And I thought, for this to work, I need to build a soundtrack. And I got very lucky. I found some stuff in my sound effects library in which I could build a convincing soundtrack, or special audio effects to look like they belong to the image you're seeing. And it worked out really, really nice. And so I laid that in there and made it sound like, a hollow, empty environment. And you hear that sound very prominently until I fade it down a little bit. There's music underneath, and then I bring up some images of from auditions as the credits roll.
Am I on? I can't even
and
tell.
So audio sound effects are definitely special effects, just like visual, and there's plenty of that in the documentary as well. So remember, documentary is it is reality and it is truth, well, at least when I do it. I've seen a lot of stuff out there that is questionable, but it's the truth that somebody wants you to believe. But my documentaries are not that way. So you always have to be conscious of how far can you go with using elements that didn't really happen, but they don't affect the story in any way. They don't alter truth in any way, and so there's plenty of that. Remember, I'm not doing a news story. I'm doing a memory. That's the way I like to think of it. It's a representation of my memories to the best of my recollection and the memories of the people that I interviewed. There can never be 100% truth because all they're doing is presenting what they believe happened. And so there it is. Okay. So I have no idea how long I've been going. But that's it. The special effects and CGI of Laughing All the Way. So hopefully I'll come up with something else to do a video on, and I'll be posting it here real soon. So until then, thank you so much for tuning in on this one. I'll see you next time.